In that vein, it leads us on to our last presenter, which is Dr. Kate Grenot. Kate, as most of you will know, and I'm sure most of you, like, or at least your organisations, will be preparing a little bit of reading material for Kate at the moment, because Kate is chair of the Australian Government's Rural Research and Development Council. And of course, as Kate is going to talk about, they currently have an investment plan out for common. Kate, you might want to remind them when you want those back in, because it's quite soon. Kate is a former director of the Industry Research and Development Board. She's also been a director of the Grape and Wine R&D Corporation, Royal Botanic Gardens and Domain Trust. Kate's also got experience in the private sector, where she was a director for Wirrawirra Vineyards, and also been an associate director of Cooperson Library. Kate's presentation today, as I guess intimated, is going to focus on the Strategic National R&D Investment Plan, which the Council has been working on over the last 12 months. And its draft form is out there for comment now, and I'm sure Kate will be delighted to get some comments back, and therefore Kate will probably stimulate those that haven't read it or responded to it now. But it's also a valuable contribution to this broader question of where do we go with our national system. So welcome, Kate.
The Rural R&D Council was established in 2009 to advise the Australian Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry on matters of R&D to do the things set out in that slide. And as Clive has kindly mentioned, our primary deliverable has been a National Strategic Rural R&D Investment Plan. Our second major deliverable will be, we hope, a performance measurement and monitoring framework. And in parallel with those two objectives, we've had a requirement to foster collaboration and cooperation across the system. There have also been some day-to-day requirements. We've reviewed each operational and strategic plan for each corporation. We've administered some grants programs in partnership with the department, and we've dealt with some specific issues as they've arisen in our capacity as acting to advise the Minister. One of the things I can offer to Julian is that a solution to how much do we have and maybe we don't have enough is to define it differently. What the Rural R&D Council would really like to do is to broaden the thinking, which so importantly has levies at the centre, to a bigger system-wide analysis. And so we would contend, and this is in the document that's out for comment, this is a contention, we want to know what you think about it, that really Australia has a large and expanding rural R&D system, within which a key component is subject to current review. But nonetheless, if you look at that and analyse it based on, albeit limited ABS data, you could estimate that the total spent, this is expenditure per annum, in 0809 was of the order of 2.9 billion. And let's remember that the levies plus matching dollar in the corporation's model is about 600 billion of that. The central component, and I'm just going to check notes here because I want to get these stats definitions right for you, is including animal, plant and fish production and products, valued at 1.1 billion in 0809. Around that, we consider that there's an expanded component along the value chain. It includes food and non-food, forest products, processing, manufacturing, biofuels, ag chemicals and pharmaceuticals, ag machinery, food safety, border biosecurity and protection. We still see that very much as rural R&D, but it's not necessarily AFF and production oriented. And then further afield, we're looking at what we're calling related. This is all the stuff that's happening around us in areas such as exotic pest and weed management, matters relating to atmosphere and weather, climate change and aspects of biodiversity, where we attribute a further 0.8 billion. And that total could, for example, be compared, if we just look at the food chain, with a 230 billion per annum system. So in that way, perhaps about 1% intensity. Now we know that there are limitations here. Business data is not disaggregated, but we have had a team doing the best they can to get a better data picture than one we've had before, because as others have mentioned, we're all concerned that there are limits with what we're working with. So just bear with me for the next 16 minutes. If we could think in terms of a $3 billion system for a few minutes. The composition of that, of course, involves a mixture of government and business interests. And if we divide the expenditure up according to categories, we can see that government, higher education and business are all actively involved. The government sector, which of course is state and federal government, undertake the largest share of that central AFF element. The business sector is predominantly involved along the value chain, as one might expect. And the government sector is also undertaking at the moment the largest share of the related to rural R&D section, with a largely environmental and social outcomes focus. Our definitions are slightly different to those used by the PC, who came in with a total of about 1.5 billion, and we've been in conversation with them about those differences. Keith showed a slide of how in grains there's been a proliferation that's created a very complex system. That 3 billion we see as a very big, busy space. In some ways it's like a market for investment. There are many ways in which you could get money into this. If you wanted to spend more, how on earth would you do it? There are many investors, research providers and stakeholders. Importantly, the system goes beyond the influence of any one minister, even the Pimmick and Pisk ministers, and requires collaboration between Australian government, state and territorial governments, higher education sector business and overseas. The complexity and fragmentation of the system creates strength from diversity, but it makes it challenging to respond cohesively to emerging opportunities and risks, and that's been identified. I just want to acknowledge, Bruce, thank you, your team there in providing this diagram. We therefore think that leadership is really important, and we estimate that there are about 1,000 great leaders across the rural R&D system in Australia. We consider ourselves to be a small council surrounded by a very large number of fantastic leaders across corporation boards and so forth, and importantly in the framework. But we do think that with all of those folk out there, there is a need for us somehow to generate a system-wide approach. We believe that investment in rural R&D needs to be managed efficiently and effectively, and with sufficient flexibility to adapt in the future. And we're keen in what we do to place producers and processors at the centre of the expanding system. Got a couple of other notes there, but I just want to pause at this point and talk about a couple of things that the Council has specifically done offline to the planning process to open up debate about this. That point of going beyond the Minister is really, really important. We became quite aware quite early on that even in having the luxury of a direct line of report to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestries, because of the way that responsibilities across the Australian administrative orders have changed since the Karen legislation, it's not easy even for him to bring about some of the changes that the system might require. And so we chose, by virtue of having the Chief Scientist as a member ex officio of our Council, to write to her in her capacity as Executive Officer of the Prime Minister's Science, Engineering and Innovation Council, to request that this issue might be considered more broadly. And we were pleased to contribute to the design of terms of reference for a food security report, which was released in December through Minister Carr and was presented at the 22nd meeting of PIMSEC last Friday. That means that all the key ministers, or at least their nominees if they weren't able to be physically present, have just heard that story. In parallel, a report was prepared by a second working group looking at intersections of carbon, energy and water in Australia, with a focus on land systems, and delivered in parallel with food meant that bringing in the rural story was very much part of what has just been communicated in the Cabinet Room at Parliament House on Friday. So as a council, we believe that that's been something that we've been able to do with the support of the Minister's Office and many others, to try to put into the decision-making across the system as a whole a great awareness of things like the Rural R&D framework, the fact that the corporations are under review, the Productivity Commission's current assumptions, how the Rural R&D Council investment plan is going. And so we now have a context broadly where if we talk about Julian's notion of dissonance, or even some of the issues of creep up, of issues that Keith alluded to, or Bruce's comments about awareness raising, we hopefully are generating a really well-informed debate where at least the language of what the framework and the council and the corporations are doing is in these files and is being circulated. So if any of you have any time, I would implore you to go onto the Chief Scientist's website and read those two papers, and if you do have time to go onto our website and comment on our plan, and with all that you know from Bruce and Keith and Julian, decide how you think we can improve those documents and implement them. And from there, we'll hopefully build a large body of support for what then comes through the framework process. In the plan itself, there's a vision for the rural R&D system, and it's not that different to many other visions that you'll see. It's very similar in some ways to the one that CSIRO publicly propagates, and I guess we're all aware that we have to increase output, vary the range of technologies, and do that in a sustainable way. The Council's gone a step further and some time ago canvassed broad investment goals. Again, these are not dissimilar to lists of goals you see in many of the individual strategies that are coming from the ID&E framework. But as we put them together, we believe that we've captured most everything that crosses our desks. And so this is intended to be an inclusive list, and when we do receive new information from any element of this $3 billion system, we check back to make sure that it fits in somewhere. Otherwise, we need to create another one. In the consultation period, we're interested in feedback on them, and the way we've put the document together, and let's remember we have a very small secretariat in DAF with some support from Aares. We don't have a large operationalised structure. It is a non-legislated advisory function to the Minister, but we have come up with a series of findings and recommendations. And the Minister very quickly said, right, okay, let's put them out and see what people think. And I just want to give you a flavour of them so that you can get a sense that we're not seeking to put another mechanism and sense of order across the top. We're seeking to understand this system and get a sense on what can be done to catalyse its development. So an example of a finding would be in relation to research workforce and the capacity deficit that Bruce alluded to early on. And here we talk about how we could better utilise technical knowledge by rural sector participants, but in a sense develop a recommendation that feeds really clearly into one of the extension strategies that will come from the framework. Similarly, we know that excellence is a driver of success in attaining research funding at the more basic end of the system. So we have a finding there about how we want to make sure that there is a high level of skills development to promote a quality agenda across rural science. And there we talk about reinvigorating that workforce by applying the Australian Government's culture of excellence, which of course is not run within DAF, but through the Australian Research Council's Excellence in Research Australia Matter. So again, it may be that the Council's best implementation strategy, having got to this point, is to really continue to work across many parties to try and help get the collective whole functioning as well as it can. I just want to make that really clear, that this is not a set of recommendations that necessarily needs any one implementing entity, but there will be a need to look at how we'll track forward. That takes us to the matter of data, and the recommendation there is that the Australian Government makes an immediate investment. It's one of the few recommendations that asks for more money now to increase data collection to support improved performance measurement of the rural RD&E system. This includes allocating resources to analyse existing and new sources of data and to clearly communicate findings, and that there be adequate provision for the maintenance and implementation of the plan and performance management system going forward. That will open up a discussion about institutional arrangements. At the moment, the performance measurement and institutional sections are quite soft in the plan. The Council is very aware of that. We really want to see what structures emerge going forward. And I want to note, as you consider that even in the last few weeks, publicly we now have under consideration an entity recommended by the Productivity Commission called the Rural Research Australia, an entity recommended by the PIMSEC Food Security Group called Food Security Australia. And so it's really important that we get the framework well understood, the corporations right in the centre, and the Council will be continuing to do that. We're actually quite relaxed about our own role going forward while we try to understand what will be the best thing going forward. And I take on board Keith's clear comment that what we don't need is other structural matter, but we do believe that it's been useful to have a Council with the luxury to operate at a broad level over the last 24 months.